acquired over the years, and most of them have some element in them that touch on his individuality. And from that I drew and integrated my material.
If you had to describe the personality of the person Gurdjieff, how would you describe him?
As someone full of energy and incredibly magnetic. I think it was a sense of his magnetism that drew me to him. I remember very early on in my tryings in this direction that I spoke with some people and they said, what is it that you want to acquire by these studies? And I spoke then of my sense of very strong attraction to the man himself. Of course, it's very strange to feel an attraction to someone that you've never actually met. And yet, something of his individuality shines through. A very great force, and yet something very refined, and something intensely human, entering into all aspects of life. I felt that, and to that I very greatly responded.
The Gurdjieff surroundings was a very closed world. How did you come to this world and how did you enter the society?
Yes, I was working in Portsmouth dockyard in quite a humble job. I was a young man. I'd always felt a wish, a sense to try to find something that lay beyond the world of ordinary appearances. And one day I went into the library and I took down this book which was called In Search of the Miraculous, which is the account by Gurdjieff's eminent pupil Pyotr Ouspensky of his time with Gurdjieff in Russia. And I read it and it absolutely stunned me with its truth, its veracity. And I felt as though a new world was opening before me. I felt that I was in touch with a truth which I'd always had an intimation of, and yet I was here seeing it in paper for the first time. Thereafter I wrote to the author of another book called Kenneth MacFarlane Walker, who was a late pupil of Gurdjieff. And Dr. Walker, or Professor Walker, was Hunterian Professor of Surgery here in London, an eminent man. And to my astonishment, he agreed to meet me, and I went to see him in Harley Street. And after a conversation, which was not too easy, he gave me a link to a meeting of a group that he held here in London. And then it all began from there.
Was he the one who introduced you into the world of Gurdjieff, or was the meeting with Ouspensky more important?
Well, of course, I never met Ouspensky himself. Ouspensky died in 1947, I think. And so that human contact was first with Kenneth Walker. But there's no question but that Ouspensky's book has more vibrancy, it has a greater sweep. It better contains what Gurdjieff himself indicated. Because Ouspensky is to Gurdjieff very much what Boswell is to Dr. Johnson. He's someone who reprised a great deal of material, very faithfully, very lucidly. With Kenneth Walker, I felt his humanity. He too was someone who'd had a very rich life, and yet he condescended to deal with me and to accept me into his group. He was already an old man. Then, of course, in a group you meet people who are also seeking, and you form friendships, and one thing follows another. It was only a year after my being in Kenneth Walker's group that I entered my first movements class, that is to say, a class in sacred dance. So that was another dimension.
What, if you mention already the movements, which importance have the movement for Gurdjieff?
A paramount importance, I would say. He is a protean figure with many, many aspects to him. That is unquestionable. And his protean characteristic makes it very difficult for people to define him. It defeats a classification, taxonomy. And yet he himself would wish very much, I think, to have been described as a teacher of temple dances. He gave his last movement, number 39, it's called in the 39 series, only about a week before he died. So he really tried to intimate something through the movements. He spoke of them as a sacred book in which one could read, by dint of actual participation, many facts, many truths. And he gave unstintingly, always seeking to find pupils who would correspond with that. Of course, he found among those pupils Jean de Salzmann, who carried on his work after he died.
I think there are different degrees of the movement. What are the different degrees of the movement, the different forms of it?
Well, I don't know quite what you mean by degrees. There are different degrees of competence, from beginners to very skilled and practiced, dedicated dancers. There are ways in which one can classify these movements. There are very strong, vigorous, so-called dervish movements for men. There are very subtle and moving, aesthetically beautiful women's dances. There are what Gurdjieff called the obligatories. These obligatories are 6 preliminary dances, which give, as it were, the repertoire, the ABC of the movements. All the people beginning to approach that milieu have to go through that. I don't know about this classification of the various dances. I feel, though I have done it myself in my book, it's not quite what he sought. The movements are an experience. It is very, very difficult to convey to someone the degree of energy, the elevation of a vibration of feeling that one can be graced with, I would say, if one really enters wholeheartedly into a movements class. Sometimes you can emerge so vivified by that experience. Of course, it has its penalty, its cost. There's a great deal of struggle and search, even suffering in some of those movements. But it's something one tries and is prepared to pay. It relates very much, of course, to the study on which you embark, and that is Gurdjieff's music, because none of the movements are attempted without music.
Where did Gurdjieff, is there something known, develop these movements from? How did he come to these movements?
Yes, well, it's difficult there to dogmatize. Clearly he was inspired by and drew on ethnic sources. For example, there are in his repertoire of movements dances that entail rotation like that. Although in the Gurdjieff movements the rotation is clockwise, whereas the Mevlevi do it anti-clockwise. But I think we would make a huge mistake if we merely supposed that Gurdjieff reworked ethnically derived dances. He caught the spirit of something there, but I believe him to have been a choreographer of genius. I don't know if you know that Lincoln Kirstein, who has a big position in ballet in New York and worked with Balanchine and so on, said that all that he, Lincoln Kirstein, had attempted in the dance was owed to Gurdjieff. Kirstein was at the Prairie briefly. So, reverting to your question, where did Gurdjieff derive these dances? I would say he derived them inside himself, as much as to say that he derived them in any geographical terrain.
The personality of Gurdjieff, the beginnings are in the dark. You don't know. You know perhaps that he was born in Alexandropol, and then he went to Kars. What we concretely know about him, about where he came from, and how he arrived to Paris, to Europe for the first time.
Yes, it would entail a recapitulation of a ferocious epoch of history, full of bloodshed and tribulation, involving the First World War, involving the Russian Civil War, and so on. His life may be looked at really as folding down the middle. In the first part of it, he was imbued and gave hospitality to a very profound question about the significance of the biosphere and the significance of humanity within the biosphere. Now, it sounds a rather abstract question, but really it partakes of something else, a refusal to take things for granted, a sense that there was something to be sought for and found. And imbued with that question, and in company of others whom he calls the seekers of truth, he seems to have embarked on a lengthy and fruitful and adventurous search, God knows where, in Asia, some say he went to the Solomon Islands, to Abyssinia, even to Australia. To say exactly is very difficult on an exact historical basis. And he came out of that epoch in which he had been a pupil, a seeker, with a teaching which he synthesized, involving all aspects of a human being, their head, their heart, and their hand, the intellect, the feelings, and the body. And from that point on, which we could set, say, in metropolitan Russia in about 1911, he began to teach. So in the first part of his life, he was a pupil, then he became a teacher. And he went, as a teacher, through all sorts of vicissitudes. He had to bring his cadre of people out of Georgia, through Turkey, to Berlin, finally to Paris. And all those tribulations were brought to a way of teaching that in the very Spartan and tricky conditions that he faced, he was always trying to impart something to his pupils. I don't know if that goes any distance towards answering your question, but what does it leave out?
The question for me was in how far he was, because he really, in this time and even now, this region where he was born, where he came from, is a real melting pot of religion, of everything.
Yes, yes.
How far he had this, let me say, these orthodox elements of Greek and Armenian and Russian church, and this religious elements of Sufism in the different forms we have, up to the sacred dances of Tibet, which he never, nobody knows if he was there. Which elements he took most in his doctrine, which was for him really the background to put into.
Yes, there again I hope I don't seem too evasive. I feel we diminish him if we restrict him to any particular segment of that. The truth is unitary, and I think that is, in a way, a platitude to say that, but the truth of a really devout Muslim, Christian, or Buddhist is not very, very dissimilar. And he sought in all those traditions, and he had a profound respect for traditions, and for those who initiated traditions, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad. He felt in them aspects of quality, and he sought for quality. All his life was a search for quality, and to impart quality, that search, to others. So I don't know, it's perhaps a sociological study which element predominated. I don't feel it. I stood in front of the people who knew him, many pupils who actually knew him, and they didn't speak of someone relaying one of the big traditions, but of someone who himself brought a kind of aura, an impression of something very alive, full of question. That is something not easily found today. Anybody can recapitulate on a theological level the great traditions. Few people can imbue it in a way that is like a master, can represent it. Few people can represent it, can embody it. And so I don't see it as really a very useful line of inquiry.
Mm-hmm. But if we wanted to define his beliefs, would it be possible to describe which belief he had? Was it more or less Muslim, or was he really creating his own beliefs, which had the roots, let me say, in Sufism, or more or less in the Greek Orthodox, or in the Armenian or Russian doctrines and church?
I love to quarrel with you. You know I love to quarrel with you.
I know that, yeah.
It's not a question for him of beliefs. It was a question of praxis, of actual trying. It was a question of methodology rather than beliefs. Many people have beliefs. I don't see him as someone who even propounded a credo. He propounded no credo. He had no liturgy. He was seeking for quality, and he seized every advantage when, with a pupil, every possibility to convey something, to open their eyes. His prime challenge is to wake from your unsuspected hypnotic sleep to consciousness and conscience. Now you could say that that formulation, awake from your unsuspected hypnotic sleep to consciousness and conscience, could have an inflection in any of the religions. So I cannot handle your question on the level that you pose it.
He founded, or I don't know if he founded or if the society was founded, but what is, for instance, what are the aims of the society? What is the society doing? What is their vivid interest still on Gurdjieff?
Yes. First of all, it's an interesting question that you pose. He, in Tbilisi, when he was there in the Georgian Menshevik Republic of Tbilisi, everything collapsing all around him, he founded what he called the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. Now, in my opinion, he hadn't much faith in institutes. I think it was a temporary measure. After his calamitous and defining motor car crash in 1924, he disbanded the institute, which was then situated at Fontainebleau, and sent everybody away. The current Gurdjieff Foundation, which goes under different names in different countries, here in Britain it goes under the name of the Gurdjieff Society, and in Australia, but in New York it's the Gurdjieff Foundation. These are nomenclatural anomalies. What is their aim? Their aim is to cherish what he brought, to continue the dances, to continue in group meetings, to bring a note of sincerity and authenticity to his teaching. You see, for us, the concepts of his work, being, presence, self-awareness, awakening, they're not abstract words. And of course, in the outer world, they can test ground, very much trespassed on by every kind of supposition and expectation. But for a real Gurdjieffian, they are concepts that have to be empirically tested through various exercises and so forth. He said, never believe anything until you verify it for yourself. So they try to keep alive the spirit of what he brought, to cherish the movements and to cherish his practice. I think that's an honorable, very, very honorable aspiration.
Is this aspiration, is it this practicing the ideas Gurdjieff had, is it really an individual thing? That means everybody has to do it by himself or by herself? Or is it really something done by the society? That means in common, with an assembly? How does it work out?
I hear what you say, as they say. Both. Of course, if I work in a movements class, I'm there in an ensemble class. These are not solitary solo dances. So I'm very much aware of the people on either side of me, to left or right, and the people in front of me if I'm not on the front row. And there is very much a sense of an experience shared. It's the same, really, in a group. I get to know the people in the group. There may be an initial period of welcome on a superficial level, and then later another period of perhaps skepticism and rejection, and finally, by dint of passing through a number of experiences together, some of them very exacting physically, I get to know the people in that group on a different basis. And that is all what I would call shared work. But of course, in the final analysis, no one can work for another. So I try, while participating in this communal endeavor, I try to find something that rings true for myself. So that there is both sharing and individualism. Gurdjieff had this very strange counsel: become a good egotist. Become a good egotist. An egotist who is an egotist because he wishes to try to free himself from some of the slavery of reaction. And when he has more or less freed himself from that, he's in a better position to serve an ideal and to help others. While people are just, as he said, many people are just machines. They can't really have a rich human relationship.
How the society gets new members, and how do you have these contacts one to the another? How do you, because up to now my encounters were always, it's a closed world. How do you enter in this world? How do you, is there any recommendation, or how do you enter in this world?
You want to join my group?
Perhaps, why not? But how is the entry? Because it's very, very difficult.
Well, you know, I have to speak now about changes in epochs. I came into the work in 1956. At that juncture, the work was already well developed organizationally, but it was difficult to find entree, to find access. I felt myself very fortunate when Kenneth Walker welcomed me and responded. Today we live in a different, and in my view, an inferior world. Everything is up for grabs. Everything. The internet has made an incredible change. The tragedy is that there is now so much advanced in imitation and derision and God knows what, that it's difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's difficult to find the authentic. And the authentic is much more difficult, I would say, to gain access to than some of these spurious movements that are very much concerned with money and with the egotism of their proponents. So let's revert to your question in its other way. How would one find access to a genuine group? Well, we have to concede to some extent that accident and fate enter into that. But if I read in a given direction, and if I'm sensitive to other people's search also, maybe sooner or later I encounter someone who is already in a group. And from then I get some kind of entree, and I write a letter and so forth. I think it would be possible to exaggerate its difficulty. It's not like the Masons. I can't give you a secret hand grip, or if I can, I don't know.
Gurdjieff invented the Enneagram. Which meaning had the Enneagram for the Gurdjieff Society?
Yes, well, it was one which is quite difficult to précis in 2 minutes on a TV interview. It was a diagram which reflected a numerical relationship within the denary system, within the system that relates to 10. In fact, it doesn't obtain in relation to a duodenary or 12-fold system. And he wished that it would exemplify the correlation of 2 of his fundamental laws. The one is what he called the law of 3, and the other is the law of 7. The law of 3 is really very much a dialectic. It's not a Hegelian dialectic, but which always leads forward and forward to the establishment of the Prussian monarchy, if I remember. But it's a very interesting dialectic. And the law of 7 relates not to transformation, but to process, how things proceed. And the thesis is that they don't proceed uniformly, that there are cadences in a process, and that those cadences are very much reflected in the musical scale. And in fact, if you work diligently with the Enneagram, you can certainly see a correlation between the law of 3 and the law of 7. Now that's a pretty abstract thing. And in my personal opinion, I wish that more work had been done on Gurdjieff's concept of the Enneagram, because now it's been captured and by people who wish to use it as a kind of psychological typology. I'm thinking of Oscar Ichazo and Claudio Naranjo and so on, Helen Palmer. So I think it's been very much dragged down into the marketplace. It was never that for Gurdjieff.
Coming to you personally, really personal, what were your experience with groups led by Kenneth Walker and then with Madame Henriette Lannes?
Chalk and cheese, as they say. In Kenneth Walker's group, which was only a preliminary group, I met an old and decent and honorable man, more or less coming to the end of his life. He was fundamentally a pupil of Ouspensky, had been for many, many years. And I met a rather abstract dispensation. With Henriette Lannes, as soon as I came into her presence, I saw what I still call the proof of the work that it is not simply another theory, another modernist religious theory. There was something in her bearing, in her eloquence, in the challenge that she issued to people, to awaken to presence, that was quite extraordinary. And you couldn't lie in the presence of Madame Lannes. If you had lied, I think it would have been as if when you breathe out on a winter's day that you see the clouds of precipitation. It could so stimulate you. That was really the distinction I would draw. Of course, I was in Madame Lannes' groups, I don't know, a long time, decades. And she never lost that quality, never lost that quality. Now you're looking there. What are you doing? You all right?
Yes.
He will cut that out, you know. You want a cushion?
No, fine.
Okay.
Who would you say was your really most important teacher, the decisive one for you, and why?
Madame Lannes.
Madame Lannes, yeah.
Without question.
Yeah.
And I said that's an interesting query too, because I had the privilege of many groups with Madame Jeanne de Salzmann, who was unquestionably the most senior person in the group. She too brought a very great demand. It was like sitting in front of, I don't know, sitting in front of an owl or a tiger. I'm sure these aren't the right words. You were sitting in front of someone who really could look into you. But I didn't form with her a very intimate bond. So I'm very grateful to have had contact with Madame de Salzmann, and of course to have had some contact with her in the movements classes. But it was Madame Lannes who influenced me most. There's a new book out about Madame Lannes, just out, called Inside a Question. It's on sale in the occult bookshop in London called Watkins. I commend it to people.
What is the outline of the work you're doing in Paris and the work you're doing in London? Is there a difference, or is every society doing the same thing, or are there interchanges?
Yes. Well, intrinsically, there is the same surge to bear witness to what Mr. Gurdjieff brought, and to give it life through our trying. But it's undeniable that the inflection of national characteristics and the mere accidents of history, for example, that Gurdjieff lived in France for donkey's years, but not in England, have left there with created an inflection. And I would say that until recently there has been an inflection in France that has been more towards quietism, an inflection in England that has occasionally given quite a high place to the Matthias Alexander system, which is a correlate system of bodywork. And in South America, I believe there's been some kind of necessary accommodation with the Roman Catholic Church. But I think that is something I wouldn't stress. There is liaison. More than ever now, there is liaison with electronic liaison. There are conferences. There is one due very shortly. Michel de Salzmann, who was Madame de Salzmann's son, held many conferences, international in character, to try to see the way forward through all the difficulties. We live in a very aggressively secular age. Incredibly secular. And Gurdjieff said there is no progress whatsoever. Modern civilization is based on violence, slavery, and fine words. And it's very difficult to harbor the ark of something real on this sea of skepticism and brutality and God knows what.
Is there anything known, how was the first encounters of Gurdjieff with the Western civilization? Why did he come to Paris, and how he was accepted in Paris in the beginning?
Yes, I'm not sure that I would admit the historicity of your question. It seems that he was in Switzerland quite as a young man, although briefly. And when he left Constantinople, it was not to France that he initially came. He was invited by Jacques Delcroze to go to Hellerau, which was, as you know, a great cultural center. It was to Germany that he first went, and it was only later, in July 1922, that he came to Paris. So he often spoke of Paris as being the world capital. I think perhaps there was at that time a great cultural ferment going on in France.
If I look over his life, I thought he had really a very familiar feeling to Paris, already a little bit distant feeling to London, and a sort of friction with New York. Would you say the same, or?
No. I think that that can't be really admitted. I think he loved Paris. I think he loved the possibilities there. He loved the vibrancy, the cafe society. He was there with the Café de la Paix and these restaurants and so on. And that, I think, is true. I don't think he had an antipathy towards England, but by the time he arrived in Paris, Ouspensky, Peter Ouspensky, who had broken from him rather radically, was firmly established here in London. So that the, if you like, the rift was perhaps between Ouspensky and Gurdjieff rather than between England and Gurdjieff. New York, I think, he greatly loved. He went there, I think, 9 times to America, often returned there, traveled there. He made friends, of course, with Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, and had a good reception and there whenever he wanted it. And so I think that the life in America, and even the food that he could get in certain Jewish shops there and so on, very much appealed to him.
Mm-hmm. If we speak about the person Gurdjieff...
Can I just cut in? You can cut out what I said. But by saying the Jewish shops, I just want to come back to something. That Gurdjieff had no prejudice, it seems to me, against English or against anybody. And it's quite clear that during the Second World War, when he was in his little apartment in Paris, and when the edict went out that all Jews should wear the yellow Star of David, he made arrangements to protect the Jewish members of his group. And my teacher, Henriette, Lannes, took into her house a Jewish family and hid them. And they were asked, they were more or less, had to make little things that she could sell on the black market to get food for them. She could sell to get food on the black market. He didn't discriminate among people. He discriminated among them, better say, not on the basis of the accident of their birth, but on the quality of their trying, their being, not their personality. You've used quite innocently this expression, what was Gurdjieff's personality? I'm concerned not with his personality, but with his being. Because that, I think, is more intrinsic to him.
Did the enneagram also have a meaning as a key for the contact to the other societies worldwide, or was it just this interior meaning of the enneagram?
No, the enneagram has no communicative value with other societies, except that, as I say, there's a certain segment of people in all the societies who are very drawn to that diagram. But all people aren't the same. Some people who are very much placed in the body, they give everything they can to those dances. And other people who are very touched in their feelings, also giving a lot to the dances, but to the music also. And some of the dances involve interior prayer, the saying of words inside. But there's also an intellectual element in any grouping of people, and that intellectual element are very much drawn to the enneagram. And you would meet those in wherever you went, whether Gurdjieffians. I must say I struggle to be one of them. I'm not very happy in that milieu.
The element of which is the importance of the element of music and the element of dance for the society and for the work of Gurdjieff?
You see everything in terms of dichotomies, don't you?
It's the way I work.
I know you want to sort of pin him down like a butterfly. Is dance or music? There is an interfusion. There is, Gurdjieff's key paradigm, which is reciprocal feeding, symbiosis. One thing, one hand washes the other, as he said. There's a real marriage between the music and the dance. You can't say that one is paramount over the other. It is true that he spoke of himself when really pressed to define himself, as a teacher of temple dances. And it's also true that the debt which Gurdjieff music owes to Thomas de Hartmann is immense, so that the music was a shared thing, really, although de Hartmann said, "It is not my music, it is his. I have only picked up the master's handkerchief," which is a very generous thing to say, when de Hartmann was a classically trained musician and Gurdjieff was not.
Could you give an impression of your own work on leading groups or giving seminars on Gurdjieff's work?
Yes, I could. I would say that my deepest experience is one of predicament. There I am, in front of a group of people who've given up an evening to come and put their questions and with candor express their difficulties. And I feel that without the help that I've received over the years, I'm utterly unworthy to sit in that seat. And when I meet their eyes, it's very, very hard. And yet sometimes I'm able to identify in their question, their observation, something that they've misunderstood, or identify something that they could take a little further. And just as anybody would who is well-wishing towards someone who applies to you, I try to respond. And as I am now, I try to let the feeling and the inspiration and the words flow. It's not at all an easy experience. As I wait to go into the group while the group settle, I really feel in a very difficult situation. And I think about my teacher, Henriette, Lannes, and behind her, Mr. Gurdjieff. What am I doing there? It is a very humbling experience indeed. As for giving seminars, I never gave any seminars at all. With Peter Brook and some others, I've sometimes participated in things as I did in Wrocław in Poland, there with hundreds of people in front of one on a public platform and with companions on either side. It's not so difficult. I had an interesting experience. I took part of the film to New Zealand in 1988, which was the centenary of Catherine Mansfield's birth. I went by invitation to the university there, and I took one of the movement's films by permission of Madame de Salzmann. And I showed it to academics there. And you know, there is this concept in the Gurdjieff work about objective art, not subjectivized art. And for me, if anything approaches that ideal of objective art, it is those movements films. And I had hoped to witness in the reception by this very high-powered academic audience, to witness a kind of really deep appreciation of that. But I did not. Immediately after the film stopped, there was a polite reception for it. So I just don't know about that. But it was a very, very interesting experience.
If we do a spirited survey of the senior pupils of Gurdjieff, who was, for instance, exactly Olga de Hartmann? Which position did she have? De Salzmann, yeah.
There again.
Jan de Salzmann, yeah.
Which one?
First Jan de Salzmann, because she's mentioned. Somebody say she was his wife, others say she was not. Which were the relations?
There's part of me that finds your line of questioning difficult to respond to, Jürgen. I mean, in terms of historicity, we know what she was. That she was the wife of Alexander de Salzmann, and that they met Gurdjieff in Tbilisi, and afterwards shared very much his travels and his life. it's true that she bore him a child, but I don't feel that that is the aspect that I'm really qualified to speak about. I wasn't there when that happened. She became, because of her strength, her being, her dedication, her capacity to have people oriented round her, she became very much the centrum of his work after he died. But she was taking his groups for 10 years before he died. He was very much concentrating on the 39 series of movements, and she took the groups. And so she is a central figure, a pivotal figure. Turning to Madame Lannes, I've already told you what my opinion of her, the most extraordinary human being that I've ever met or ever expect to meet. Olga de Hartmann. Olga de Hartmann, I met her only once, and it's cavalier of me to give a kind of adverse impression of her on the basis of one meeting. I had the impression of a rather lightweight figure who had her formation, her education very much in pre-revolutionary Russia, very much a high aristocrat who nevertheless had walked in high heels over the Caucasus Mountains with Gurdjieff. You know, it's not exactly nothing with a 60-pound pack or whatever they did. So she is someone, I think, very much in the shadow of her brilliant husband and very, very dedicated to him. So mine was a fugitive contact with her, and I'm very glad that I made it. In fact, we were she sat with those taking the group. I was a group member, just a young group member, and afterwards she asked to speak to me, to my astonishment. Of course, there were 20 or 25 people in the group, and we did speak together. What we said, I have to tell you, I have forgotten.
Another person who was a bridge between, I think, London and Paris was Jane Heap. What was her role?
What was her role?
Yeah, what was her personality, let me say that way, because
well, she was a complete power. She was a very strong individual. I've shown you her photograph. She was a 100% cross-dressing lesbian. Okay. Nevertheless, I think we do her a big disservice and the work a disservice if we define her in terms of her sexuality, because she undoubtedly was a very strong magnet towards people who were involved in culture, like Peter Brook, who went to her group just about the same time as I went to Madame Lannes. And that's not nothing. Another person whom she very much helped was Michael Currer-Briggs. You might not, it might not mean anything to you, but I saw her once or twice. She came to our big days on either January the 13th, which is the celebrated day of Mr. Gurdjieff's putative birthday, or on October the 29th, the day when he died. And there are usually gatherings there in which various readings are given and so on. So I did see her, and I must say I found her not a very easy sort of sight. I found something very stony and basilisk-faced there. But on the other hand, the pupils that I met of hers, I found very alive and very human.
And the Jasmine Howard, she's the mother of Dushka Howard. Did you meet her?
Yes, I did meet her briefly in the back of a car. And I didn't have a chance to speak to her very much. She was a friend of Mrs. Rosemary Knott, who was my first movements teacher, taught me the obligatories. And I think Jasmine and Rosemary worked very, very hard on the movements. And now Dushka is someone I think you're trying to get to see.
Yes, we
Good
do.
luck.
Yeah. And the other one was Roland Kenny. And
Yes, I remember Roland Kenny very well. He took our group for about a year. He was an archetypal English gentleman from the North Country. He wore, I remember, a gold watch on a chain. That I very much remember. He also was very badly affected with his hearing and could hardly hear what we could say. But he was very upright. He had had an adventurous life, and in the British intelligence services and so on. I don't know what more I can tell you. How does this really bear on Gurdjieff's music? We're talking now about someone who was deaf and who can't play an instrument. Where is this conversation going?
No, it's just some people which you mentioned and
Yes.
you met, and therefore
Yes.
I'm asking for them.
Yes, yes.
What is your, like Louise March still?
Yes, Louise March, Louise Gurdjieff. She was German, of course. I used occasionally to read for her. Well, what can I say about her? I don't know. She was a woman. She was elderly when I met her. She founded in America a crafts guild. You know that crafts guild? I don't know what it is. She probably knows. I don't know. There is I can look it up for you.
Yeah.
There was a Gurdjieff set up, very much focused on art and crafts in America. And after the war, she set that up.
And Jessie Orridge, I think she's even...
Now, Jessie Orridge, I can tell you about. When I wrote my first book, Gurdjieff and Mansfield, I didn't like most of the reviews that I got. And then I got one that I didn't expect from this woman I'd hardly forgotten, Jessie Orridge. Oh, she said, you have written the best book on Gurdjieff that I have ever read. I thought, oh, well, at last my life is vindicated. And she said, would you come and see me, because I have also some memories of him. I thought, my God, she's also got some memories of him. I should think so. And so I went out to where she lived, which is not so far from London, about 20 miles. And I met her at a pub called the Five Horseshoes. And there came in this woman. She'd driven up in her old Land Rover. She drove over the fields because she was barred from the road. She'd had too many accidents when intoxicated. And so she came in, it was a summer's day, and we started to drink, and the wasps were there all round, helping us to drink the beer or the spirits or whatever. And I got to know Jessie, and she would drive me over the fields in this Land Rover. She'd usually had quite a lot of spirits to drink. I used in the end to take her vodka. And in the old barn near to her farm, there were all these empty bottles of vodka lying there. It was called Nuttall's Farm. She was living there in conditions of great primitive things. She had no electricity there. Can you imagine in an cold English winter? She had a little old black and white television set that she worked off a car battery. And all lying round her house were these first editions, all signed first editions of 1930s novelists and so on, Americans. An extraordinary treasure house of material. It was very difficult to get any response out of Jessie because her mind was pickled with alcohol, and she was in her 80s. I'm not quite there yet. I'm working on it. But it was difficult to get coherent, clear historical stuff from her. But I was very interested that this woman who had been so close to Gurdjieff and who had in a way quarrelled with him about Orridge was there and brought to these circumstances. And I must say too that when I consider all the money that is in the foundation groups in New York, and I thought of Jessie living there in a house without electricity, tears came to my eyes, really. It was quite sad. A real character. She was Jessie Dwight Orridge, and she claimed to be of the same family, and I think a second cousin to Dwight D. Eisenhower. And in a certain light, Her face was just like Eisenhower's. It was extraordinary to see this woman attacking the vodka and see like General Eisenhower there. I hope this is not going on television.
And what about Lord Pentland?
Well, I only met him twice, I think. Very tall gentleman, ectomorph, I suppose, Robert Sheldon's classification. Very much a gentlemanly, aristocratic figure. I didn't find him a warm individual at all. He had a luminous intellect, but I'm not sitting in judgment on all these people. They must sit in judgment on me. You've got it upside down.
But who is now left of the time of Gurdjieff, who is still alive, and who is running the society today?
Honestly, these are dreadful questions. Who is running the society? You want to... I think that is what the foundation... the foundation themselves are asking themselves that. That is their question too. That is their question. Who is running it? What's going on? That is why they have conferences and things. The unitary powers, foci of work, criteria of endeavour have gone. First Gurdjieff, then Madame de Salzmann, first Madame Lannes, then Madame de Salzmann, then in New York, Dr. Welch, who was the doctor who attended Gurdjieff on his deathbed, he had a big unitary force. Pentland is gone. So that there is a sense of fragmentation. At the same time, there is the invasion of all kinds of spurious imitation groups. So it's a great time of turmoil, I would say. Mr. Trackall, Henri Trackall, you've heard of him?
No.
Wonderful man, the husband sometime husband of Henriette Lannes, wrote some marvelous books, marvelous material. Henri Trackall once said to me, in another 20 years, all that will be left of Gurdjieff is fur and feathers. That will all be left of him. A very sad thought. I contend against that thought. I'm not very happy to accept that, although I see its likelihood.
Are there still today people who worked directly with Gurdjieff, or is it all over now? Is there nobody left who had direct contact with him?
Well, yes, there are quite a smattering of them. I mean, you're going to try to see Dushka there, I told you there. You don't want me to run through a list of them. There are a list of them, a dwindling number of people. A dwindling number of people. I would guess 30 or 40 people who are still worked with him. But I think we make a mistake if we assign to people who worked with him a kind of resultant supremacy over people who didn't. I've met some people who were with him, perhaps shortly, who were absolute dolts, absolute idiots. And I've met some people who didn't, who really gave an impression of life. So I think we have to seek for gold where it is, not where we think it is.